Welcome back to another episode of Insights with Experts, where we aim to encourage and foster discussion, learning, and creating an informed global community. To view this and other interviews in detail, head over to theseer.org, linked in the description. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to our channel for constant updates. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Insights with Experts. Today, we are glad to be joined by Natasha from TechCrunch. How are you today, Natasha?
I'm doing great, guys. I'm half vaccinated, so I can't complain, and I'm excited to talk about all things journalism, which is my favorite topic.
I guess we'll just jump straight into it. So, how did you actually decide that you wanted to do journalism? Because you actually studied journalism in university, so I guess you knew from a relatively young age that was the interest
Yeah,
there.
totally. It's a really boring story because I'm one of the lucky people that always knew what I wanted to do. When I was in sixth grade, I really liked to creatively write. My parents, who are from India, were basically like, you need to do a more professional version of that. So I quite literally looked for a professional version of writing, and that was journalism, and really fell in love with it from there. I was like in the newspaper club always, went to Boston University to study journalism. I think that's where I really knew that I got energy and got kind of had a liked more than just writing. I like telling stories of people. So I interned at the Boston Globe and San Francisco Chronicle, then these really traditional newsrooms. And after I came to San Francisco, tech naturally pulled me in. So I started working at Crunchbase News and now obviously at TechCrunch covering startups. And so I've always really been attracted to the idea of telling stories. And then the kinds of stories I've told has definitely changed since I started.
So, focusing on your career in journalism, do you have a specific favorite part of journalism, like a specific subtopic of journalism, or have you always been in this sort of tech field, or have you moved around?
I think, to be super meta about it, my favorite part about journalism are the times that I get to interview people who aren't used to being interviewed. And that's not because I'm like, oh, gotcha. It's more like you get to elevate stories of people who aren't used to having their stories elevated. And so I think like that has definitely turned into my favorite bit of any beat I cover.
Jumping back to your experience at the Boston Globe and San Francisco Chronicles, you actually interned at a lot more newspapers, websites, and stuff like that. So I guess A, how did you deal and how did you source for so many internships? And B, what has the difference been like across beat, across different organizations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way in which I got internships was, I mean, I can tie every opportunity I've ever gotten in journalism back to a single person and single decision I've made. The very basic idea of being very shameless in asking, I think has gone really far for me in my career. My job at TC was because of a DM to the editor in chief.
What would be some of your tips of applying to these very competitive schools?
Ooh, yeah. Oh, it feels like so long ago now. But I think for me, and I think this is obviously a privilege that I had, but a huge benefit for my application process was I went to the campus a few times. I had done a summer program at Boston University. I had visited for not accepted for potential students day. And I don't think that helped me get into the university, but I do think it helped me visualize myself and really like figure out what my pitch was. Like, I think, if you're innately meant to be somewhere and you see yourself there and you get to go there, it just does a great job of helping you like have the confidence to apply in the first place. Figure out the schools that you feel like very drawn to just emotionally, whether it's because of the city or the program, apply to those and really find people who go to those schools and just be like, will you read my essay? I would be so happy if someone applying to BU asked me to read their essay. I would be so honored. And I think there's so many alum just want to see more young journalists out there. So if you are applying to a undergrad degree in journalism at BU, you should DM me on Twitter and I will happily read your essay. I won't guarantee anything, but I think you should really take advantage. And back to this theme of being very shameless about asking for help early on. I think you don't need to pretend like you know everything because none of us do.
What would your take be on like rankings, university rankings, and how important is that really for success?
I think it's so cliche, but I'm very happy I didn't get into Northwestern. Like, I'm just so happy I did ED there. So if I got in, I would have had to go. And I'm looking back, I'm so glad I didn't get into something, because I know I applied to that school for no reason other than when you Google best journalism school in the country, Northwestern comes up. I really had no reason. And it's hard to ask an 18-year-old to like self-reflect to an existential point where they realize what motives are driving them, because so much of our generation, it's innate. You don't think about it. You do the club freshman year of high school because you want to get into Harvard one day. It's hard to ask someone to think about it more than, in that way. Once you're out of it, it's so much easier to look back. So I do try and tell people, like, it's super toxic to go into a school being like, this wasn't my number one, and this acceptance rate was, X, Y, and Z bigger than my dream school. I don't think it does anyone justice. And I hope, and if I ever do go to grad school, I want to make sure it's not just, I'm not saying yes for the wrong reasons. This time was luck. The next time I don't want it to be luck. Like, I want to feel like, truly like I had that fit there.
Going to your writing at TechCrunch, I guess, what is the process like about finding a startup to write about, and how do you do your research? And I guess, what is it like? I'm assuming you're going to be bombarded with pitches and people wanting PR quite often. So how do you filter through that? How do you deal with that? Any time where people have maybe crossed the line in talking to you about getting featured?
Yeah, definitely that happens all the time. I'll start with, I guess, positive and how people are able to get my attention. Always feels weird to say, because like, it's not that it's me being on some pedestal. It's more like we're all so goddamn busy. So it's just hard to find signal through all the noise. I think the people that I love writing about are, again, the people who aren't used to having their stories told. Do you have this really, amazing backstory that's more than just your degree? That's more than just that internship that you had? Do you have this like very specific reason why you're doing this career and solving this problem as a startup founder? I feel like that's when my eyes light up during a phone call. So I really optimize to get diverse people, to get the startups the earliest before they get that huge venture capital investment, and follow them along that road. The only thing I think that is potentially like not, or that is definitely not a great way to talk to a journalist, especially a female journalist, is to be overly familiar with them. I think that tends to be just misogyny being repackaged into a DM that makes you feel like you're just friends, grabbing beers. But I do think there is a layer of professionalism you should have with journalists. I wish I could be everyone's friend, but I shouldn't be, and I can't be if I'm a journalist. I have to be unbiased, quote unquote, whole separate conversation. But I have found a lot of people in just like really, horrible ways, just talking down to me because I am a female journalist of color, and thinking that that's going to, help them be in cahoots with me. But calling me Angel or giving me a nickname that I didn't really ask for is not a way to get attention. In fact, I think it's a way that you are showing your true colors.
So what is your opinion on sort of paid articles and sort of like that paid advertisement? And do you believe that it can really be seen through the writing whether or not a journalist is being definitely like genuine with what they're trying to say?
I think journalists have to do a lot of work on getting people to trust them. I do not think all journalists deserve, you know, everyone to trust them immediately. I think people have made a lot of mistakes in our side of the table. And so I don't ever get mad when someone is scared to tell me a detail. I simply explain why I have no incentive to screw them over. I think, as for your question on paid articles, I think they have a time and place. My only like obvious note there is they have to be explicit. I don't want to not know if it's a paid article.
Speaking about the quality of reporting, what do you think about clickbait titles, clickbait valuation figures, and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think all journalists know what headlines will get clicked on. Like, we're not going to lie and pretend like we don't know the way in which people act. We have the analytic tools and we can write them ourselves. We've seen our stories blow up overnight. I don't think it's going to get you super far. I don't think you're going to be able to investigate a huge company or get a scoop if all you do is clickbait and kind of, as I described, the low-hanging fruit stories. And so I think that there's a balance you have to strike. I mean, as I said earlier in the beginning of this kind of chat, I started reporting about tech 2 years ago. I have written stories in which I have not been the smartest person on the topic. and maybe I missed the critical angle. And so someone would call that clickbait. I'm not like the proudest of those stories at my previous job. I think those were necessary building blocks to get to a place where I can be immediately critical of a startup when I hear about them and ask them good questions. I'm a natural optimist, so I'm not going to be like anti-startups. I wouldn't be in this profession if I was. But I think to your point of clickbait, I think like the rebrand I would give is like uneducated or overly simplistic. And I would vote that if you're going to be overly simplistic in a headline, it's just not going to get you too far. And I'm going to hope that any journalist that does do that is doing it because they either don't know better and are building towards something more nuanced, or hopefully internally they have a staff like I do that makes them see that missing piece and avoid that headline.
Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. To learn more about Orakui as well as more information about our upcoming episodes, don't forget to follow our socials for constant updates and education content. Links are always in the description.
The Daily Telegraph recently mentioned that they will be basing the pay of their journalists on likes, how many likes a certain article gets. So what would your opinion be on that? Whether like how should we go about this and have the two work together and not work against each other?
Yeah, I mean, I think every news organization has a different ethos. I don't think that would ever happen at TechCrunch where we would base our pay off of likes or social credibility in that sort of way. In fact, our editor-in-chief often tells us to stop following the people we do on Twitter because it makes you realize that you're in an echo chamber and you're not really writing for the people who follow you on Twitter. You're writing for the people who maybe don't have a Twitter and don't really know much about tech. It's not the people who understand everything about Clubhouse ever. And so I think social media and journalism at its best can work really, really well. It's helped me diversify my stories. It's helped me grow a following. It's shown me the power of tech in so many different ways and just it helped me learn so much. But as you kind of alluded to earlier, Daria, I think like making something that isn't supposed to be bite-sized can escape a lot of nuance and anger a lot of people and kind of go back to what we're talking about, which is ruining the credibility of journalists. The bad part about Twitter, social media is it does incentivize you to take away the craziest, not craziest, but the spiciest things in your story, and drum up some enthusiasm. And so I feel like you just need to be really careful with how you use social media. And if it's something you give too much weight to or only source from, you're not really writing, at least at TC, you're not really writing for all your readers. You're writing for tech Twitter.
Going to your experience in TechCrunch and sort of covering the startup space, what are trends you have been noticing recently? Ed tech, SaaS, stuff like that.
So I am seeing that post-pandemic, at least in the US, I'm seeing a lot more focus on collectivism as a startup strategy. In digital health, for example, it's going from how do we help the individual figure out this problem they have to how do we use the power of a lot of people experiencing the same problem, combine them, and make it something that like they can all kind of naturally help each other.
You think there have been new industries and new things that have gotten more fundable and have started because of COVID and the pandemic?
Totally. I mean, I spent the last year and a half working on the beat of ed tech, education, technology companies. And you saw those companies become unicorns, profits, IPOs even now, and consolidation in one short period of time. I mean, ed tech had energy behind it. There have been funds created around it before the pandemic, but wow, it is crazy to see the way that industry has grown from a capital perspective, from an exit perspective, and just like energy and interest and innovation.
You mentioned earlier that sort of you still feel like there is sort of some blurred lines with that and sort of unprofessional behavior in that sense. So what is your opinion on that, and where do you see this going in the future, and how can we sort of combat that?
Yeah, I mean, there is a harassment problem with female journalists, point blank, especially female tech journalists. It's gross. And a lot of powerful men with a lot of money are upset that women are holding them accountable by writing about their companies, their way that they're spending their money, what they do in their downtime, et cetera, et cetera. And that's always been true, but it does feel like it's gotten to yet another point of really, toxic And I hate like setting benchmarks as if it wasn't bad before. It just is getting continuously worse. And so it's a huge problem and we need to do a lot more about it. We need to elevate female journalists. We need to make sure that they are amplified and not speak for them. And we need to treat them like they are, just badass, because they are. I just think that like there is this really weird like tendency for people to talk down, and it just, the weird tendency is called sexism. But I think it's something that I've definitely experienced, not internally but more externally, just being in tech and writing about companies. There have been other male journalists, other publications that have been horrible. There have been just people offering me panel positions in exchange for dates. Like there's these really weird things that happen when you're a public facing entity as a female in tech. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you that, but yeah, it's definitely a huge problem, and would love to see more men being vocal about supporting their female journalists, either in any way.
Should startups chase PR, or should they focus, hit down, execute, and then the PR comes after?
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know if I'm the best person to speak on that, because I'm a little removed from like how it actually impacts their bottom line. I mean, there are so many ways that startups can use press to their advantage, and some of the best feelings are when you write about a startup before anyone else has, and then Sequoia Capital invests in them, and you feel really valid in thinking that a startup was cool because another firm actually put millions of money that put behind them. And so I think if I was a startup thinking about press just for a second, I would say, I want to make sure I use the press not as my growth strategy point, like, start to stop, but use it as like, when do I actually have news, and how do I make sure my message can actually resonate with people and not be noise. I think like if the only thing people can talk about is your valuation, it's no longer interesting. That should not be something that I would be super excited about if I was a founder. Like, I think if I'm a founder, I want to make sure the most interesting thing about me isn't the fact that I was able to raise money about executing something, but what I've actually executed with that money.
If you could leave the youth with one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice actually be?
To make sure you remember that like you yourself are your competitive advantage in your field. You don't need to settle for something lower.
Thanks for listening in. This podcast has been brought to you by Desire, a platform designed to bridge the gap between the youth and professionals. You can read more about us at desire.org. And you can also check out the section titled Insights with Experts, where you can submit your questions that you might have for future experts and industries that you would like to learn more about. And you can also refer in any experts that you might know yourself.